My immoral mother-in-law lied about me and accused me of being unfaithful, and my cowardly husband left me pregnant. After a few weeks, the facts came to light. Sadly, he was left out in the cold. My 27-year-old husband, Clark, and I are divorcing, and I just learned that his mother had been poisoning him to turn him against me. After dating for 4 years and getting married 2 years ago, we've been trying to have a kid for the last year or so. However, our luck hasn't been on our side. Our marriage has suffered since I still haven't conceived despite our constancy. We avoided talking about the pregnancy too much, but our irritation manifested itself in other arguments, and we refused to even consider the possibility that one of us may be infertile. So we just continued trying, and so we would argue about meaningless, trivial matters often. There was a lot of tension between us recently, so it took a long time, but I eventually found out I was pregnant around a month ago. In the beginning, we were overjoyed. We even had a party to let everyone know, and everything was running well. But after the party, we began behaving in a really strange and unusual way. No matter how much I tried, he still refused to tell me what was wrong, and I had no idea why he had suddenly begun to withdraw from me and seem aloof. Then, when I was pregnant, I finally had enough of his constant rejection and told him that if he wanted to continue behaving this way, I would rather go live with my mom. That angered him. He became quite angry and began to shout at me. He also expressed his desire to have me expelled, saying that seeing my face simply served to anger him more. He also said he should have known better since I was identical to my mom. Even though I questioned his meaning, he insisted that he was well aware that he had no hand in my pregnancy. It must have been someone else since he is infertile, according to what he knows. He had himself tested a few weeks after we found out we were expecting because he thought it was a little too abrupt. He finally lost the will to trust me and tell me to go. I attempted to persuade him that I had not cheated on him. Nevertheless, he was inconsolable and would not listen to me. And I just couldn't take it any longer. This prompted me to get all of my belongings and leave as soon as possible. I had had enough. That day, he told me I could return after a paternity test, or else I should simply remain away, and I knew then that I couldn't return to him. Consequently, I phoned my mom. I've been remaining with her, saw an attorney, and filed for a divorce. However, he has recently expressed a desire to halt the divorce procedures. In essence, he just learned that his mom had lied to him about the fertility test results he had gotten. It's hardly surprising that she acted in that way. Ever since our initial encounter, she has harbored animosity against me. She knew my mom from when they were friends, as they had some mutual acquaintances, and she had a bad attitude about my mom in her earlier years. My mom used to be quite the social butterfly, which, according to my mother-in-law, made her a woman of loose character who hopped from relationship to relationship without ever settling down. My mom has been single since my dad died away a few years ago, so it's likely that she's reverted to her old ways. Do not think I'm exaggerating. I haven't had a conversation with my mother-in-law since she said these things to me. This occurred not long after my nuptials. My mother-in-law recently said these awful things about my mom during an altercation that she and I had. As a result, I informed my husband that he was free to maintain contact with her for his own pleasure, yet I had no intention of doing so. Clark did reprimand his mother for being so critical. However, he did maintain contact with her in the end. It is evident that he did not respect me or my family, even at that young age. Therefore, I should have left him immediately. If he had, his mother wouldn't have had as much sway over him. Rumors have it that she was the one who suggested to him that I could have cheated on him, despite the fact that I am technically his daughter from a previous marriage. This is why, upon informing his parents of my pregnancy, he felt compelled to get a fertility test. The fact that his mother persuaded him to visit her brother's clinic for a self-test is terrible. Even Clark's own mother and uncle lied to him. They tampered with the findings to sow discord amongst us, and he was fooled. He overheard his mom and uncle talking on the phone a few days earlier, He learned the truth in that way. Just now, he's severed ties with his mom. Furthermore, he is pleading with me to return. Unfortunately, it is not going to happen. Since I was booted out, 2 weeks had gone by. After all that transpired, I just cannot fathom returning to him, since it is now very evident that he lacks faith in me. I also don't believe I can remain married to someone who I can't trust. Despite his mother's assurances, he continued to distrust my sincerity and suspected that I was unfaithful to him. On top of that, I've been miserable because of it. Because of this, I have no desire to return. I've already discussed this with my pals. Despite their consensus that it was very foolish of him, I must consider the situation from his point of view as well, as he was ultimately informed of the findings of the tests. And it goes without saying that any reasonable person would believe that without hesitation. Not that he discovered it and promptly booted me out. It's more likely that he was also unsure of what to do with the knowledge. It took him a few weeks. The only thing that made him snap was when I brought up my mom. Therefore, people assume that he too had a difficult time making the choice. Plus, I should probably give him a pass for the time being. Beyond that, it's very evident that my mother-in-law had been poisoning him for years in order to get him to turn against my mom and me. It was inevitable that it would have an impact. My mother's history is beyond my control at this moment. There was no changing her. Not that I feel any guilt or embarrassment because of her. Even while it's true that she dated a different person on the weekend when she was younger, the reality remains that most people wouldn't take too kindly upon her lifestyle. My intention is not to embarrass her. That's just the way it was. The woman has come clean about it. That being said, neither Clark nor his parents have any business shaming her for it. They have the right to their own views, however. Despite our long history of knowing one another, I find it strange that he continues to portray me in the same way. Regardless, I'm just perplexed, since ultimately he did get those test results. I suppose I would have some reservations about it if I were in his shoes. Still, I'm not sure I'm willing to give him a second shot. However, I'm still not sure I want to give him another opportunity. So, what should I do, Eita, if I choose to end my marriage? Make changes. Since it is not directly applicable to my case, I refrained from mentioning it. Nonetheless, Clark has filed a lawsuit against both his uncle and the medical practice he heads. There was a major infraction committed by them. Furthermore, he has evidence that will land them in serious danger. The screenshots he discovered on his mom's phone are all in his possession. Plus, I'm crossing my fingers that he holds them accountable. Our marriage was destroyed by their combined efforts. Whatever comes their way, they very much deserve it. I didn't believe anybody in his family could hate me to this extent, save maybe his mom. So the fact that his uncle went to such lengths to aid his mom in ruining our marriage shocks me. However, I suppose that is not the case. Update 1. 2 weeks have passed since I last provided an update. My intention is not to return, as I informed Clark. Even while I'm sad he fell for his uncle and mother's ruse, I can't help but feel bad about it since he did indeed distrust me, even though I never intended for him to. Even when we were arguing and he accused me of being too much like my mom, he hadn't been completely forthright with me about the fertility test or anything else in our relationship. I was certain the kid had to have been his, so I attempted to reassure him that he could simply undergo another round of testing to rule out the possibility that it had been a mistake or that he wasn't really infertile after all. Even though I was completely on his side, he still didn't trust me and ended our relationship while I was pregnant. His comments about my mom were also quite insulting, and I would not stand for it. No matter how crazy or wild my parents were before I was born, they stopped being that way for my sake and raised me the greatest manner they could have imagined. My mom, she could have partied a little too much when she was younger and been uncomfortable with commitment, but I would not hold it against her since it was her decision. Furthermore, I find it offensive that he would assume the same thing about me, particularly considering that we have been married for 2 years and that I expressed my desire to begin trying to conceive. That to me is the definition of a commitment. Whatever the case may be, I would never even consider returning to him because of his disrespect for my family and myself. He could now sit back and feel guilty about his actions. Nothing would be altered by it. I banned him after sending that SMS to ensure he couldn't reply. I thought he had accepted his fate for a few days after that message went unanswered, but then, approximately 5 days later, he texted me from a different number, expressing his desire to meet and talk because he knew we could fix our marriage and he didn't want to give up so easily, especially now that I was nearly a mother. Normally, I wouldn't have responded to that message, but his hypocritical phrasing bothered me since I was going to become a mother despite his earlier expulsion. He was preoccupied with himself and whatever bullshit his mom had been feeding him, so it hadn't crossed his mind. Now, for his own convenience, he believes he can beg me to return, and I'll go along with him. Because he clearly didn't give a hoot about any of that a few weeks ago. I just told him that it was very hypocritical of him to bring it up now. I was about to block him once again when he interrupted me, acknowledging his mistake. To be fair, he had just come to terms with the fact that his own family was to blame for the demise of his marriage, so I should have been understanding if he was going through a tough time. It baffled me that he was so eager to portray himself as the victim, as if he lacked agency, despite everything that had transpired. I decided to contact him at the given number because I wanted to tell him what was on my mind. I didn't care if it escalated the situation. All I wanted to do was let my emotions out. I wasted no time putting him in his place as soon as he rang up. I informed him that his marriage had been destroyed by more than simply his relatives. In that regard, he also played a significant influence. He can't continue to deny that everything that transpired required his permission. He was susceptible to being led astray by his mother, who made him think I could have cheated on him. Instead of having a fertility test and then evicting me without giving me an explanation, he would have just spoken to me and never even considered the notion if our trust levels were same. That is the way a happy marriage functions. People are engaging in conversation instead of isolating themselves. It was strange that he felt the need to place blame on his family when he was just as much to blame. I silenced him every time he attempted to interrupt me or defend himself. I just informed him that it was pitiful that he persisted in seeing himself as a victim despite the fact that he shared the same level of guilt as his family. His parents took advantage of the fact that he had suspicions about me for no apparent reason. He can't deny that our marriage ended due to his own insecurities and anxieties. Finally, after saying all that, I ended the call. The outcome is no longer important to me. The fact that I was able to express myself has helped me tremendously. 2 weeks have passed since my previous post, and I haven't had much to say since the divorce is proceeding swimmingly. Since our last chat, Clark and I have avoided each other at all costs. The only times we do speak are when it's necessary for our attorneys to mediate our interactions. It seems like he has a lot on his plate between the divorce, the lawsuits he filed against his uncle, and the reproductive clinic, and everything else going on in his life. Child custody is still something we haven't discussed, but I'm assuming we can put it off till after the kid is born, since my mother believes it would be unjust. I haven't made up my mind on how to handle the situation. Truthfully, I like to have my kid at my side at all times. I should seize the opportunity if there's any possibility that our child might have a pleasant, ordinary existence despite our present situation. After all, he may turn out to be a decent dad regardless of how he was a spouse. Thus, I am uncertain. Even if we end up sharing custody, I will ensure that I have plenty time with the kid while they are little so that I can bond with them. I find solace in it for the time being. Things have been going swimmingly with the pregnancy so far, and my mom has been driving me to all my doctor's visits. I'm so grateful for this since I was really scared that the stress would have an adverse effect on my body and the pregnancy. However, it seems that my unborn child and I possess more resilience than I had anticipated. Everything is running well at the moment. Despite everything, there are still times when I'm sad that my child won't have the same opportunities I had. It has come to my attention that many infants whose parents have divorced do quite well. While I don't necessarily disagree with the concept, I suppose my goal is that my child will grow up with both parents cooperating. In any case, I'm sorry about the divorce. Nevertheless, it's too late to go back now. And even if it weren't, I still don't believe getting back together with Clark would be a good idea. I believe my child would choose a decent, independent pair of parents than a terrible, incompetent one. The guilt is genuine, but at least that's what I tell myself to keep from being too disappointed by what's happening. I feel like I'm ruining my chances of experiencing the joy of being a parent for my child. In theory, I am doing what is best for everyone involved, but in practice, it isn't that simple, and that's odd. Third update. Hello there. Thus, I had been discussing the possibility of joint custody with Clark in my last update. With the finalization of our divorce deadline looming on the horizon, he requested to talk with me alone after our meeting today, rather than with our attorneys. Knowing that this would revolve on the custody agreement, I consented. We had to find a middle ground on how to raise our kid. He said me as we sat in the next coffee shop, putting aside the divorce and all our arguments. He suggested waiting a few months after we finalized the divorce and other matters before beginning to consider a custody agreement. However, prior to that, he only wanted an in-person meeting with me to ascertain our level of agreement and, by extension, to forestall any potential future issues. I told him I wanted him to come see me whenever he wanted, but I also wanted the baby to spend a lot of time with me in the beginning because, in my opinion, a mother's presence is paramount during those first few weeks of life. He could spend all the time he wanted with the baby since I wouldn't stand in his way. It would be sufficient for him to go for the night. I wasn't very concerned about doing anything by myself since I would be living with my mom, so I would have all the assistance I needed. He first seemed okay to the idea, but then he informed me that we would have to divide custody responsibilities when the kid was older. He suggested that we both spend half the week with the infant, and he would spend the other half with him. We continued our discussion and came to the conclusion that we should wait until the baby is older to make any adjustments. If this arrangement doesn't work, we can work out a custody plan. I believe we reached the consensus that we would meet with our attorneys again in a few months to finalize the papers and ensure everything was handled lawfully. Surprisingly, the conversation went more smoothly than I had anticipated. As it came to a close, I remembered that this was our first conversation since our previous heated phone chat, and we had actually managed to remain polite. So I came to the realization that maybe co-parenting the baby wouldn't be that tough anyway. I'm grateful for that because if he had intended to be difficult throughout, I would have had to ask for full custody, which I would have hated because I'm sure he would have fought like crazy. Not to mention, I'm relieved that we've resolved to set aside our disagreements for the time being in order to focus on our kid. He expressed deep regret for not being there for me as the baby's father and for having to handle all the medical details alone with my mother after we finished discussing the custody arrangement. I assured him that wasn't a major concern, but he assured me that moving forward, he would do his best to support me and the kid, considering all the ways he had let us down. I could see he was sorry for all that had gone wrong, even if he didn't express it. I believe he was afraid of interrupting our chat, so he didn't directly mention it, but he did hint at it, and I took that as a sign. Finally, he seems to have accepted his error and isn't attempting to defend himself any longer. Perhaps he will really apologize at a later time, but for the moment, this will do. I have faith in his ability to win a substantial sum of money from his lawsuit against his uncle. He has already promised to pay half of it to me as child support, and he has updated me on the status of the case. I hope he wins because it's the right thing to do and because it would be good for the baby and myself. I am eagerly anticipating his mom and uncle's defeat. They are well deserving of it. Whatever happened, I feel like it's over now. Therefore, my resentment at Clark has mostly subsided. Keeping our eyes on the prize, a happy, healthy baby as it grows up should be our only concern. However, I fear that my hatred for his mother and uncle will never fade. The child custody agreement may very well include this provision. I refuse to let that lady or her brother to be in the same room as my unborn child. She has no right to be the grandmother of the little girl whose life she ruined. Under my leadership, it will never occur. Even if Clark objects, I may end up with complete custody of my child nonetheless, since she will only have one grandma, my mom. In the future, I will have to worry about it, Having just emerged from a very stressful circumstance, all I want to do right now is take a break. The fourth update is here. I'm approaching the third trimester of my pregnancy, and things are becoming fairly heavy since my divorce was completed 2 months ago. At least in our coffee date, Clark has been very punctual for our appointments, and he has kept all of his promises. Since the baby has begun to kick, he has also been dropping by quite a bit, and we enjoy his desire to play with the baby. My mom avoided him the first 2 or 3 times he dropped by for understandable reasons. She was well aware of his and his family's negative opinions of her, so she avoided him the first 2 times he dropped by. But on the third visit, he made an effort to find her and apologized, telling her that he felt terrible about believing the lies his mom had told him about her and that he was sorry he had let her influence him. Also, on that same day, he apologized to me and explained that he understood we couldn't return to our old ways of being, but that he still wanted us to set our differences aside for a while. Now that he was coming clean about the issues, he wanted everyone to give him a chance to show that he wasn't a bad person, but rather he had been misled. To me, it seemed harmless. I had already forgiven him and let go of any resentment since we would have to share parenting responsibilities for our child anyway. My mom seemed to be okay with it too, so that was a relief. I also wanted to make it clear in the child custody agreement that I did not want his mom or uncle to have any contact with our kid at any time, regardless of whether he chose to make amends with them in the future. I recently had a conversation with him about my thoughts and feelings on this matter. I was worried I would have a hard time convincing him to agree to that, but he really wasn't resistant. To be more precise, he made zero resistance. His recent statement that he could relate to the sentiment conveyed was reassuring. He is currently on bad terms with both of them and sees little hope of improving their relationship in the near future, mostly due to his own distaste for doing so. Now that we've taken care of it, we're going to consult with attorneys and have the necessary papers for the custody agreement signed shortly. The fifth update is that my baby daughter was born last week, and she is just stunning. Thankfully, my mom was by my side during the whole delivery, and Clark even made it to the hospital the moment I went into labor, so I didn't lose track of time. It was all worthwhile when they gave me custody of my kid. Since he arrived a few days ago, Clark has been with us and has been an incredible assistance to my mom and me with everything we need. He's been sleeping on the sofa and hasn't spoken a word of complaint. I'm quite appreciative of his presence to provide a hand. Despite the lack of emotion, we are both overjoyed to have become parents, and he appears genuinely delighted to be a dad. My kid will have a fantastic future regardless of whether her parents split or not. That will be guaranteed by us. Now that we have the custody papers in hand, I'm relieved since I don't see us having much time for anything other than our kid for the foreseeable future. For the next several months, I want to devote my whole attention to my kid, so I doubt you will see any updates from me either. Every new parent, I suppose, will understand just what I mean. So I suppose that's it for now. Before I sign off, I wanted to say thanks for all the kind comments you've left for me. May blessings keep falling on us.